The rain in Moscow fell softly on the Luzhniki Stadium that night, but for the 11 men in red and white, every drop felt like fire. Luka Modrić stood near the center circle, his hair plastered to his forehead, eyes glazed not with defeat but disbelief. Around him, teammates sank to the grass, exhausted, hearts broken, yet strangely fulfilled. They had come within touching distance of the greatest prize in football, something no one from their small, war-scarred nation had ever dared dream could be real. Croatia, a country of just over 4 million, had taken on the world, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed they might win. France lifted the trophy, but Croatia lifted something deeper, a sense of belonging on the grandest stage. In that moment, they weren't underdogs. They were equals, even if the scoreboard said otherwise. To understand how they arrived there, how a nation younger than most of its players managed to outlast footballing empires, we need to rewind. Back to the fields of Dalmatia, the noise of small-town stadiums and the heartbeat of a people who, time and again, turned adversity into art. Because this isn't just a football story. It's a story about identity, resilience, and the audacity of belief. It began in Group D, where few gave Croatia much of a chance. Argentina, led by Lionel Messi, were the favorites. Nigeria brought flair and youth. Iceland, the surprise of the previous Euro, offered spirit. But Zlatko Dalic's team, calm, organized, almost invisible in the media chatter, had something else. Discipline, chemistry, a quiet, shared hunger. Their opening match against Nigeria in Kaliningrad wasn't spectacular, but it was symbolic. A 2-0 win built on structure and patience. Modrić and Rakitic controlled the tempo like master conductors, orchestrating passes with invisible strings. Andrej Kramaric's movement stretched defenders. Mandzukic fought every aerial ball as if his life depended on it. The message was clear. Croatia had come to play their way. No flash, just ruthless efficiency. But then came Nizhny Novgorod, and the night the world began to believe. Argentina, backed by a sea of blue and white shirts and the eternal hope of Messi magic, were dismantled piece by piece. Croatia didn't just win, they dominated. A 3-0 statement. Every touch from Modrić carried calm authority, his 80th minute. Curling strike from 25 yards cementing the upset in history. Rakitic's late goal only rubbed salt into Argentina's wounds. The stats told the story. 83% passing accuracy, 60% duels won. But numbers couldn't capture the feeling, a small nation standing tall against giants. That performance wasn't a fluke. It was the manifestation of a philosophy, a belief that intelligence, unity, and heart could bridge any gap in talent or resources. Dalic's 4-3-3 wasn't revolutionary, but it was perfectly tuned to the player's strengths. Modrić as the metronome, Rakitic as the stabilizer, Perisic as the chaos bringer, and Mandzukic as the relentless engine. Every man knew his role, every man trusted the other. And in a tournament where superstars often played for headlines, Croatia played for each other. But heroes aren't born in the comfort of success, they're shaped by the struggle beneath it. To understand the 2018 team, you need to go back, decades back, to the childhoods of players who grew up in a country fighting for its very existence. Luka Modrić was just 6 years old when his grandfather was killed during the Croatian War of Independence. His family fled to the coastal city of Zadar, living in a modest hotel converted into refugee housing. The young boy's escape was football, kicking a ball across parking lots scarred by shellfire. Coaches remember him as frail, undersized, but with a stubbornness that bordered on defiance. He never stopped running, never stopped learning. Ivan Rakitic, born in Switzerland to Croatian parents, grew up between two worlds. His decision to represent Croatia instead of the Swiss national team wasn't about career strategy. It was about belonging. "It's in my blood," he once said. "Croatia is who I am." Mario Mandzukic, tough as granite, grew up in Slavonski Brod, a border town frequently shelled during the war. His energy, his aggression, his refusal to back down, all trace back to that environment. He was a fighter before he was ever a footballer. Danijel Subasic, the quiet goalkeeper from Zadar, carried his own story of endurance. His father was Serbian, his mother Croatian, a mix that made life complicated during times of division. But on the pitch, none of that mattered. His performances, especially during 2018, would come to symbolize unity, the idea. That identity could be inclusive, that Croatia's strength was built on diversity of experience. Even the coach, Zlatko Dalic, was a product of resilience. Before 2017, he was a relative unknown, having managed in the Middle East and worked his way up quietly, humbly. When he took over the national team just before the final qualifying matches, Croatia were on the brink of failure. Yet Dalic exuded calm. He didn't shout, didn't lecture. He simply reminded the players of who they were. Talent is nothing without humility, he told them. That belief turned a fractured squad into a family. By the time they reached the knockout rounds, Croatia were no longer a curiosity. They were contenders, but also, still, underdogs in the eyes of many. The path ahead looked brutal. Denmark first, then Russia, then perhaps England or Belgium. Every step demanded something extraordinary. The round of 16 against Denmark began in chaos. Mathias Jorgensen's goal, after just 58 seconds, shocked the Croatians. But Perisic and Mandzukic responded almost instantly, forcing an equalizer within minutes. What followed was a stalemate of nerves, sweat and tactical tension. Croatia dominated possession but couldn't break through. In the 116th minute, Modrić had the chance to seal it, a penalty to win the match. He stepped up, eyes calm, and struck low. Kasper Schmeichel guessed right. Save. The moment could have broken him. It didn't. In the shootout that followed, Subasic became a national hero, saving 3 penalties and sending Croatia through. The image of him limping, injured, but still diving full stretch. That was Croatia in microcosm. Battered, hurting, but unyielding. Then came Russia, the host nation. An atmosphere of pure hostility, 80,000 fans roaring for the home side. Again, Croatia went to extra time. Again, they were pushed to the limit. Subasic, still carrying a hamstring strain, made save after save. Perisic hit the post. Mandzukic's pressing forced mistakes. Finally, Domagoj Vida rose in the 101 stones minute to nod in what seemed the winner. But Russia equalized. Penalties again. And once more, Croatia held their nerve. By then they had played the equivalent of an extra match's worth of minutes. Physically, it made no sense that they could keep going. Yet mentally, they seemed to grow stronger. The world began to notice. Analysts pointed out their tactical discipline, Modrić and Rakitic's constant recycling of the ball to draw opponents out, the wingers' relentless tracking back, the defenders' bravery in one-on-one duels. Dalic's side weren't flashy. They were efficient, patient, clinical. The kind of team that wore you down until you forgot how to breathe. And perhaps most impressively, they had no superstar ego. Modrić, though the heartbeat, rarely celebrated wildly. Mandzukic often sprinted to hug defenders after scoring. Subasic deflected praise onto his teammates. They were a collective, something increasingly rare in modern football. But even fairy tales have their moments of doubt, their valleys of despair before the final ascent. As Croatia prepared for their semi-final against England, fatigue had become their invisible opponent. 3 consecutive matches that went to extra time had stretched them beyond reason. Analysts wondered if their legs would hold, if their hearts would finally give out. England, by contrast, looked fresh, buoyed by youth and optimism. Gareth Southgate's men had scored 12 goals in the tournament and their fans were already singing, "It's coming home" across Moscow. For Croatia, this was not just a semi-final. It was a battle against narrative, against the idea that small nations were meant to be footnotes, not authors of football history. 5 minutes in, England struck. Kieran Trippier curled a free kick into the top corner, and the stadium erupted. The noise was deafening, the momentum almost overwhelming. But if Croatia were phased, they didn't show it. Possession by possession, they clawed back control. Modrić and Rakitic began to dictate rhythm again, forcing England backward. In the 68th minute, Perisic lunged acrobatically to flick the ball past Jordan Pickford, 1-1. Suddenly, belief flooded back. England looked rattled. Extra time arrived, and the Croatians, impossibly, seemed to grow stronger. Mandzukic, limping and grimacing, kept pressing. Then, in the 109th minute, came the moment that would live forever. A loose ball in the box. Mandzukic anticipated, darted, struck. Goal. Croatia 2, England 1. The stadium shook. The players collapsed in a pile of red and white. Dalic raised his fists skyward. Back home, the streets of Zagreb exploded into celebration. Croatia had done it. They were going to their first ever World Cup final. It wasn't luck. It was belief, built on years of struggle, shared purpose, and a collective refusal to quit. Dalic summed it up best afterward. We may not have the biggest talent, but we have the biggest heart. My players are mentality giants. That phrase, mentality giants, became Croatia's new identity. What can we learn from that rise? That greatness doesn't always come from size, wealth, or history. Sometimes, it comes from pain refined into purpose, from a generation that learned how to suffer and still keep moving. Croatia's story reminds us that the underdog isn't defined by weakness, but by the courage to chase the impossible when no one else believes. And in Russia in 2018, they proved it on the grandest stage of all. The night before the final, Moscow was restless. The city glowed with electricity, humming with the anticipation of history. For France, it was another step in reclaiming their global dominance. For Croatia, it was the summit of an improbable climb, the final act of a miracle. In the quiet of the team hotel, Zlatko Dalic walked the halls like a man pacing through a dream. He stopped outside each room, listening to the laughter, the music, the occasional shout of card games. His players were calm, too calm perhaps, but that was their nature. They had already lived through the impossible. What was one more game? Luka Modrić sat alone for a while, looking out the window toward the distant lights of the Luzhniki Stadium. His body was drained, his legs felt heavy, but his mind was sharp. He had played more minutes than any other outfield player in the tournament, and yet his only thought was of his teammates, of the millions back, home, waiting to see their flag lifted where it had never been before. For Dalic, preparation was everything. He knew France's speed, their ruthless efficiency on the counter-attack, their power in transition, Mbappe's acceleration, Griezmann's craft, Pogba's strength. They could devastate in seconds. So he set his plan: control possession, win midfield dominance, press high but calculated, make the giants chase. And for the first 20 minutes of the final, Croatia did just that. They pressed, they passed, they owned the ball. They played without fear. But football, like life, isn't always kind to the brave. A free kick floated into the box in the 18th minute. Mario Mandzukic rose to defend, and the ball skimmed off his head into his own net. 1-0 France. Misfortune disguised as inevitability, yet Croatia refused to crumble. They attacked again, Modrić orchestrating every move with surgical precision. In the 28th minute, a corner whipped in, chaos followed, and Ivan Perisic unleashed a left-footed strike through a crowd of legs. 1-1. For a brief, delirious moment, Croatia had equilibrium. Then came the heartbreak. Just 10 minutes later, a French corner struck Perisic's hand in the box. The referee consulted VAR. A decision. Penalty. Griezmann stepped up. 2-1 France. The air seemed to leave the stadium. Dalic looked skyward, lips pressed tight. He had seen enough football to know what momentum meant and how cruelly it could turn. Still, Croatia pressed on. They finished the half with more possession, more passes, more heart. But France were ruthless. In the second half, Paul Pogba's curling shot made it 3, and Mbappe's laser-like finish sealed the 4th. Mandzukic's opportunistic goal, capitalizing on a mistake by Hugo Lloris, was brave but futile. When the final whistle blew, it was France 4, Croatia 2. The scoreboard said defeat, but the world saw victory. Croatia had outplayed France for large stretches, dominating possession 61% to 39%, outpassing them, outworking them. They just hadn't outscored them. But no one watching cared. The applause from both sides of the stadium was thunderous. As Modrić stood on the podium to receive the golden ball, his eyes glistened. Around him, confetti fell, blue, red, white, the colors of France, but somehow it felt Croatian too. Because in that moment, the world saw not the runners-up, but the miracle makers. When they landed back in Zagreb, the noise was deafening. Streets flooded with over 500,000 people, an ocean of red and white checkers stretching as far as the eye could see. Children sat on shoulders, old men waved flags, and every rooftop seemed to sing the same song, Moja Domovina, my homeland. The team bus crawled through the city at walking pace, the players leaning out, eyes wide with disbelief. Modrić held his golden ball high, Rakitic clapped rhythmically to the chants, and Dalic just smiled, exhausted and proud. The journey from anonymity to immortality had taken only a month, but the echoes would last a lifetime. It was more than sport now. It was identity. For years, Croatia had carried the burden of being the small country that produces great players. From Suker and Boban in 1998 to Modric's generation, talent had never been in question. But 2018 changed perception. Croatia was no longer a source of individuals, it was a force of collective will. Their campaign set records, the first team since 1990 to win back-to-back knockout games on penalties, the smallest nation in population to reach a World Cup final since Uruguay in 1950, and a team that played over 360 minutes of extra-time football in a single tournament, an endurance unmatched in modern history. But behind those numbers lay something deeper, an idea that football could be more than just tactics or talent, that it could be a mirror reflecting the spirit of a people. If the World Cup was Croatia's proving ground, its aftermath became their legacy. Luka Modric's personal story reached cinematic heights that year. Once told he was too small, too fragile for top-level football, he became not just a World Cup finalist, but also the Ballon d'Or winner, the first player in over a decade to break the Messi-Ronaldo duopoly. He stood on the stage in Paris, tears in his eyes, dedicating the award to all who dared to believe. His humility remained untouched. He returned to Madrid, kept playing, kept running, always with the same quiet intensity. Ivan Rakitic, too, continued to shine for Barcelona before eventually returning home to Sevilla, carrying with him the sense that he'd lived through something unrepeatable. Mandzukic retired from international football shortly after the tournament, his body finally demanding rest. His letter to fans was simple: we dreamed together, we fought together, and we made history together. Subasic followed, bowing out as one of Croatia's greats. His penalty saves against Denmark and Russia would forever be part of the country's folklore. Zlatko Dalic remained the quiet architect, rarely in the spotlight, yet deeply respected for his composure and humility. He would lead Croatia again in later tournaments, still guided by the same principle: unity above all. But perhaps the most profound legacy wasn't in the medals or the records. It was in the children who kicked. Footballs across schoolyards in Split, Osijek, Rijeka and Zagreb, shouting names like Modrić and Perisic, as if invoking a spell. The generation that watched 2018 would grow up believing that nothing was impossible, that even the smallest country could shake the giants. The lessons of that summer in Russia remain timeless. First, that leadership can be quiet. Dalic didn't command with ego but with empathy. His players trusted him because he trusted them. Second, that adversity can be fuel. Many of Croatia's stars came from hardship: refugees, underdogs, outsiders. They didn't run from that identity, they embraced it. It became their engine. And finally, that unity multiplies strength. The Croatian team wasn't built on superstars, but on synergy. Every pass, every block, every recovery, it was all done for each other. In a world obsessed with individual brilliance, Croatia reminded us that collective belief still wins hearts. Years later, when people look back at the 2018 World Cup, they'll remember France as champions, But they'll feel Croatia. They'll remember Modric's quiet leadership, Perisic's tireless runs, Mandžukic's never-ending fight. They'll recall Subasic's saves, Rakitic's composure, Dalic's calm faith. And they'll remember that small countries can dream big, and that those dreams, even when they fall just short, can change how the world sees what's possible. In Croatia's story lies a universal truth. You don't need to win to be remembered. You just need to fight until the final whistle. That summer, they did exactly that. The years that followed only deepened the myth. Croatia's national team continued to perform beyond expectations, reaching the World Cup's semi-final. Again in 2022, this time led by a 37-year-old Modrić who refused to fade. The miracle had become the standard. Journalists began to call it the Croatian model, a blend of technical education, emotional intelligence, and national pride that allowed a small country to compete with the world's richest footballing empires. And if you asked Modrić about it, he'd probably just smile that modest smile and say, "We play with heart, that's all." But that heart, was everything. From the war-scarred streets of Zadar to the bright lights of Moscow, Croatia's journey had come full circle. What began as survival had become transcendence. As the sun set on the tournament, the images lingered. Modric's weary smile, Dalic's calm gratitude, the players' tears mixing with rain as fans sang in unison. It wasn't just about football anymore. It was about a nation healing, uniting, and finding joy in the face of exhaustion. The 2018 Croatia team didn't just play the game. They reminded the world what it means to believe. And that belief, more than any trophy, is what endures. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories in sport aren't about victory. They're about courage, about how far you can go when no one thinks you can. Croatia didn't just reach a final, they redefined what a final could mean. They showed that greatness isn't about winning everything, it's about giving everything. And in the summer of 2018, they gave the world one of the greatest stories football has ever told. So maybe the question isn't why Croatia lost that day. Maybe it's how they managed to make the world fall in love with them by doing what they always did: fight, believe, and never, ever give up. Because that's what miracles are made of. And in Russia in 2018, a small country by the Adriatic didn't just play in a World Cup, they changed it forever. And if this story moved you, if the echoes of the World Cup still make your heart beat a little faster, stay with us. More journeys, more legends, more moments that shaped the world's game are still to come. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join this growing community of football storytellers, because the past is never just history, it's the heartbeat of everything still to come.